Welcome to another episode of Between the Bites Live. This is our final week so far. We might do this
Aw.
again, but this is our final week of going back to back live in October, which is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We are capping it off by going big and deep on cybersecurity this week. We're asking the hard questions, the tough questions, maybe even the more technical questions. But there's a reason Derek and I are the hosts. We are non technical, aka we're dumb. So
Dumb.
we can better approach cybersecurity so that hopefully everyone can understand it. And of course, that's our goal. Everyone should know about IT and especially cybersecurity. So, if you haven't caught the other live episodes this past month, we've had a couple of fun diversion ones where we've talked about Apple, Mac, Android, and the rest. Go check those out on wherever you get your podcasts or here on the social feed. But today we're doing advanced cybersecurity, and it wouldn't be an IT show without fun acronyms. And we're going to lead with one of those fun acronyms. And I was looking it up. I realized there are three variations of basically the same thing: MDM, MAM, and MIM, which was one I had never even heard of, but they're all
Yeah.
kind of the same thing. So, James Fair, our
Yes,
resident
sir.
expert, MDM, what does that even stand for? What does it have to do with cybersecurity? What are we doing?
Yeah, so MDM is mobile device management, and this is how we secure mobile devices. So typically, we think of your mobile phone, right? We want to be able to, let's say it gets stolen. We want to be able to remotely wipe that information off of there. We want to make sure everyone can get to it. We want to be able to control it to some degree. So particularly if this is a corporate device, if the company is providing cell phones to their employees, we want to be able to secure it. We want to be able to make sure that things are properly set up, like if it's got a pin to get into it or face recognition or something, some additional layer. So the short version is that it's really about controlling the mobile phone. Um, some other acronyms we can get into in a minute. Go ahead and ask your questions.
Yeah. You know, I'm all about the random questions here. Does MDM include like geo tracking of a device?
Geofencing is typically what we'll look for. We want to make sure that it's not, if the device suddenly shows up in China. Maybe, unless the person's on vacation, that's probably not a legitimate thing, right? That could be a SIM attack or a cloned phone or something like that. So, yeah, uh, a lot of these things will allow us to do what's called conditional access policies, where these certain conditions have to exist before you're allowed to use the phone. So,
Hmm.
it must show up in a country where we have a branch office, for instance, things like that. So that's the short version of it. It actually does, and technically, MAM or mobile application management is a part of MDM. We love our acronyms in tech, in case you couldn't tell. Um, but it is really, it's mostly in the field, in the world, we consider it very separate parts. One is controlling the device, one is controlling the applications on the device itself. So MDM, think of maybe want to encrypt the phone. We want to make sure that, uh, like I said, in case it's stolen, we've got some remote actions are capable of it. We're going to set restrictions on sharing, clipboard use, screenshot taking, so we can protect the organization's intellectual property. I was going to say IP, but we've got enough acronyms going. So intellectual property, right? Um, we want to maybe throw an antivirus program on there. So we're going to push applications to it, although that's more MAM. But MA, you kind of get the idea, right? So this is, it feels Big Brother-ish, and when we implement these, a lot of people respond that way. But at the same token, at the same time, we want to make sure that the organization's data is being secure, and this is how we do it. Just a couple days ago, I saw on one of the sites that there were over 14 apps on the Google Android App Store that were malware, right? They were stealing
Straight up
data.
malware.
Yeah, straight up malware. And, it somehow made it to the App Store. They're not quite as strict on there as they are on the Apple Store. We talked about that before. So, we can't necessarily control who grabs what off the App Store. We can, but it's a different level. But we want to make sure the data on that phone is being secured, even if something gets infected on it. So that's really what these components you're talking about are meant to do. Cool.
And is it an actual app that goes on your phone that does MDM or MAM for your device?
So MDM is typically so two different ways. It comes from the manufacturer, from the provider. So Verizon or AT&T, whoever it is, the organization will work with them to make sure it's loaded in the phone before it's sent out to the employee. So before it's shipped out. The other option is to enroll a phone. So you're enrolling it into a program, and that is what allows it. Now, as far as MAM goes, that's typically done at some software level. So think of MDM primarily used in the environments where it's a corporate device, and MAM, so application management, where we have personal devices. We're allowing people, another acronym, right? BYOD. People
Right.
are bringing their own devices, your own device, BYOD, into the corporate environment. So how do we secure those when they belong to somebody else? When we can't necessarily lock them down. Well, what we do is we lock down the applications. So in the event of a Microsoft shop, for instance, like we are here at Executech, we want to lock down Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint, those things that have the corporate data on them. And the way you do that is um, you load, they call it a wrapper. So it's basically a program, which is the framework with the other programs that load up inside of there. So you may have Outlook, but it's actually running inside of a program that you can't see. And that's the part that's preventing you from doing screenshots or copying the data out of that. So we can make sure all that corporate data is being as secure as possible. And it's not just for malicious users, of course, it's for some of this malware and things like that that are going on. And malware can steal your data if you don't have these things in place. And we can do things like lock the phone, raise alarms, right? If geofencing happens, right? So we find a phone is suddenly in a country where it should not belong, now we can send out alarms, we can lock the thing down, we can block those applications from running. So that's the short version.
But I guess,
That
and I
makes
know
sense.
this is an important clarification as we've gone through some of this exercise at Executech over the past months and
We have,
years,
yeah.
right? Very very close to home here. I know one big concern that people say is, well, this is my phone, this is my stuff. I don't want corporate, like you said, a little bit of big brother concern, seeing what I'm doing, or having
Yeah.
control over my data. But the clarification is that it only can control or touch or anything corporate related data, as you said, that Outlook, Teams, or related apps.
In the case
That
of MAM, right.
Yeah.
So let's say in MDM, I have the ability to remotely wipe the entire phone, factory default the thing. That's in case it gets stolen or lost. In the case of MAM, I can only wipe out the corporate data, which is the data we really care about, right? I don't need to wipe out your photos or whatever. So, yeah. So a little qualification there, but yes.
Is this approach applicable to personal, again, BYOD, bring your own device, laptops as well? Is that is
Yes,
that would that be
absolutely.
considered an MAM approach?
MDM typically is what we load on a laptop. So we want to make sure the laptops are secure. Uh, we can, we can, and yeah, it feels Big Brother us to know where your laptop is, right? Are you actually at work? Are you messing around? Are you at home? Are you, on vacation? Whatever. But I would like to believe, at least most organizations, that isn't the point. The point is to make sure it's not stolen, lost, or headed to Mexico, right, or some other country where you're not doing business. That's the point of the geolocator, the GPS functions of those devices. Is we just want to make sure that they are, it happens all the time. I get calls from clients and internally where someone's laptop got stolen. People tend to have it for some reason, have a tendency to leave them on the car seat as they run into the store. While someone breaks the car window, steals the laptop, and I get a phone call saying, "Hey, my laptop got stolen." So now we want to be able to jump on and make sure that if that thing comes online, it's going to get wiped completely, right? And those files will be available for people to see. And we can enforce things like encryption. So worst case, if a technical person steals it and they yank the hard drive out of it or the solid state drive out of it, they can't read the data because it's all encrypted.
Mm. Okay, so that does bring up another point on my surprise list of advanced cybersecurity topics I wanted to throw your way
All
is
right.
encryption. We've covered encryption on past episodes, and I don't want to go super deep on it because it involves math, and none of us want to do math on this. But maybe give us a 101 what in encryption and why encryption.
Yeah. What encryption? So the simplest version is in the case of Windows or Mac, we're going to leverage the built-in operating system encryption functions, which is BitLocker in the case of Windows, File Vault in the case of a Mac, for instance. Those are built in, and the purpose is most computers are multi-user. So let's say that I share my computer with my, I don't know, kids or something, but I've got a folder that contains whatever private information I don't want the kids to see. I can encrypt that data so that it prompts me for some kind of a password or something in order to see that information. So that's really the basic function and why it's built into our operating systems. It's to lock out folders to keep things more secure. Prior to us implementing all these security features, whenever I worked with other organizations' data, I had a separate folder I would download things to that was encrypted. So worst case, if someone came in and stole my desktop out of my house, they would not be able, they'd be able to find all my photos and all my documents, but the stuff for clients would be secure in a separate folder. So uh, that's really the desire for it and why it exists altogether. And then we want to leverage that more thoroughly for all company data. So we're going to encrypt anything to do, like, it's very much like what I did at home, only on a wider scale. If you have a company laptop, I'm going to make sure the whole thing, because I don't know where you might be saving data. You could be saving in different places. It could be in your user folder, it could be on the hard drive, on the C root of the C drive, it could be anywhere. So let's just encrypt the whole thing to be safe about it. And then similarly, we're going to do the same thing with phones because phones really have an internal kind of a drive, right? They got a storage device, storage medium. So we're going to encrypt that so that if I yank that thing out, I can't just open those files up and see them. A lot of troubleshooting in the past for IT people, if we had trouble accessing on the computer itself, we could yank the storage medium out, plug it into a different computer, and read the data off of it. We could sometimes change passwords and that kind of thing. This
Mm,
prevents that from happening, right? Because now it's just, I don't know, it's just gibberish when you look at it.
all right.
Answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I
Yeah.
I won't ask the deeper follow-up questions unless our audience wants to jump in. If there are people listening live and they really want to know how does encryption work, I think it's fascinating. It does involve math and can get a little technical, but let's not go there for now. Unless you want to ask it, go ahead and throw it in the comments, and we'll go there. Um, yeah. So encryption. Let's circle back to
Okay.
our original, all of our M acronyms. There's one last one again that we maybe didn't cover. I know it's pretty similar. MIM, which mobile information management, kind of the same thing as MAM, or is there a difference there that needs to be called
I'll
out?
be honest, Gary, you've hit me with a new one. I do not
Ooh,
know MIM. Now, I'm familiar with EMM, which is Enterprise Mobility Management. And I think they made a universal one called UEC, Universal Enterprise, something. What's the rest of it? Enterprise. Anyway, UEM,
mobile
that was it.
information management, which yeah, just sounds like it's MAM with a different flavor.
Okay,
So
cool.
whatever. Okay. Again, continuing our theme here of more advanced cyber thoughts and approaches and techniques. In our first episode of the month of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we did a very thorough breakdown of what the layers of security are. And the Shrek reference went right over James' head, but we won't go back and dwell on that. Um, but one of the things we mentioned that's an essential layer is a firewall, which it doesn't get more 101 than that. I feel like if you're a business, you need to have a firewall. But let's go a layer deeper on that in terms of firewall configuration or firewall even specs. Talk to us about what we should be looking for in terms of the specifications, how they differ. And again, I know firewall configuration for IT people is pretty advanced. So obviously we don't want to go into the nitty gritty, but what does that mean when
Yeah,
we say configuring a firewall?
sure. So let's separate out firewalls a little bit. So we've got the firewall, like Windows firewalls built into Windows. And a lot of antivirus programs have their own firewall built in. So those are
This is
software firewalls.
software, not a hardware,
Yeah,
right?
right. We're talking about our hardware firewalls that are meant to protect an office environment. So, you've got the organization has an office everyone goes to. That's the kind of firewall we're talking about. And yes, please, everyone have it. If you think about it, that is the gateway between your internal private, cloud or network and the rest of the world. Every attacker out there and across the entire world is out there, and unfortunately, they are actually out there attempting to hack into the things as soon as they show up in a lot of cases. So this is definitely where we want to spend some money and get a real good product. Now, if you think about your home device, our home networks, our home ISPs provide us with a modem. That's what they call it, a cable modem or a DSL modem. Those have a pretty fundamental basic firewall built in. So they're not just a modem, they're actually a firewall, and they're technically, I won't get too technical here, but they're a router. So we are running out of addresses in the internet space. So we have external addresses and we have internal addresses and routing between those two. So you can have 100 devices on the inside, but they all appear to come from one address on the outside. So it's also routing. I don't necessarily want to dive into that one too deeply, but to get back to the original question. So firewalls, good ones, the ones we want to put in our organizations to protect our offices, should act as those perimeter routers. So they're the gateway between, like I said, us and the rest of the world. They should be able to provide some VPN services. We've talked about those in the past, right? Virtual private networks. So connections between branch offices, connections between mobile users and the office environments. They can act as though they're sitting in the office, even though they may be remote. It should use what's called IDS, another acronym. We love these. Intrusion detection system. So, all right, let me back up to do a little metaphor here. So imagine, um, let's see, how am I going to put this? Your location is like it's a home with a whole bunch of different roads coming at it. So you have an address, and there's a whole bunch of different roads coming to your address. And unlike our actual physical environment, we everything's delivered on a different road. So the mailman is coming on a different road than the streaming Netflix is. So that's really how we kind of want to think about these things. We're coming down different roads. So a good firewall needs to monitor those roads and only allow traffic from the roads that it knows should be applicable. So you should be able to block all roads except those ones you need. I need to get mail. I want to get my streaming service. I need to get web services, whatever it may be. So we're going to do some packet filtering that way. That's a very fundamental uh, usage of a firewall. Now, a stateful firewall, which is the kind I want to recommend, is not only blocking roads, but what it allows through in a road, it's pulling apart and looking to see what's inside that truck, right? You're going to deliver mail. Well, what's in that mail? I want to read that letter and make sure it's okay before I give it to my user to make sure it's valid. Okay, so back to IDS. So intrusion detection is when an attacker on the outside starts looking at all the inroads into your environment and says, "Ooh, what's open? What roads does this person have open?" That kind of tells me what they're doing, what kind of firewall they might have. And it provides a lot of information when they do these outside assessments. So a good firewall then is going to detect that someone is checking all the different roads and block that address from being able to do that. Now, a good attacker will come at you from multiple angles from different hosts across the world, so you can't really necessarily do that. But then, even then, right? If I see someone scanning from here and someone scanning from here, someone scanning from here, that's suspicious behavior. We're going to block that. So that's intrusion detection system or IDS. Okay, a couple more mouthfuls. So we also really want this thing to do antivirus. Hopefully, we're all running antivirus on our laptops and desktops on their devices. But it wouldn't hurt if the firewall itself also did that. So while it's pulling apart those packets and looking inside, look inside to see if there's a virus in there, right? Um, Good ones will also do what's called anti-botnet. So if you're familiar with bots, that's where I've infected someone else's computer, but they don't know about it, and I can leverage that in the future. It becomes my bot to use. This is how Here's another acronym. This is how DDoS attacks or denial of service attacks happen. As I have thousands of bots out there, and all at once I launch them against your address. Now suddenly you can't do anything because your address is being flooded and it can't keep up. So a good firewall will watch. Well, there's a lot of known bots out there, bot networks out there, right? A lot of law enforcement agencies are keeping track of these. The security folks know where a lot of them are. So if it sees traffic either coming from a bot network or going out of your network, worst case, coming out of your network, going to one, it's going to alert you to say, hey, something's up. You probably have an infected computer because it's reaching out to a network out there that it should not be talking to. They should be doing content filtering, especially you're in an organization. You want to make sure people can't get to sites that aren't appropriate. This is particular of like schools, right? Schools should not be able to get to gun sites or hate sites or things like this. We want to make sure those are protected. That's not always the case. If you make guns, for instance, you're probably going to allow gun sites at your location. So content filters need to be specific for the organization. And then you probably want to make sure you have some kind of application filtering. So we're going to allow um, Zoom, but we're not going to allow YouTube, for instance, whatever it is. So now we're looking at not necessarily what road things are taking, but the application running on that road, right? Who's delivering that mechanism? So we're going to look for specific applications to be able to block those. I want to allow safe YouTube, but block all other YouTube. I'm going to allow Zoom and Teams, but not some of these other ones I've never heard of. We're going to block remote control traffic, so people can't do remote control services, these kind of things. So application filtering is also an important part of a good firewall, and all of these things need to be configured from someone, right? So this is where your IT people come in. If you don't have them on staff, third parties are great. They'll come in and they'll configure those appropriately for your organization and your environment. A lot of places where we take over will show them what their firewall looks like on the outside, what roads are open. Then we'll go in and configure it properly and show them what it looks like after that. And roads can be very specific. You can filter like, I only want addresses from Gary and Derik, but not anybody else. So now when I try to scan it from the outside, I can't see that those roads are open, even though to you, they appear that they are. So those are good firewall techniques. If I'm going to do business with a certain organization, if I know their address, I can only allow traffic from that address. So now I've set up a much more secure road that's open, but only to them.
And we had one question from the audience.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Holly asked, how important is it for a private consumer to have a firewall for their home network?
If it were up to me, everyone would be running a firewall, right? But it probably doesn't make a lot of sense for someone to spend upwards of $500,000 on a decent home firewall. Do I? Yeah, I'm an IT guy, so I run a firewall at home, you can bet. And I certainly encourage others to do it. If you're doing a home office, maybe you should consider a firewall. If you are doing some kind of a intellectual property, out of your home, and then definitely you may want to consider that. In most cases, for most people, the ISP's modem is generally sufficient for our needs, because you're going to require not only get it by the firewall, but then you have to find someone to set it up. And you don't have an IT guy necessarily living at your house in all cases. So we want to do what makes sense, but to what level of security we can. Good question.
Is there any steps I should be taking on my home modem around these configuration items that you've mentioned?
Yeah, by default, most of the time, what we call port forwarding or allowing inroads is turned off by default. In some cases, man, how technical do you want to get here? There is a service called Universal Plug and Play, which is on for most home devices, most home modems. And that is, if I bring say a wireless device or some other device into my home network and plug it in, it can talk to the firewall and say, please open up these roads for me, these ports for me. That's a universal plug and play. Many of them support that. Be cautious of anything that uses that. But in general, I think the default is probably okay. There's, for Comcast, for instance, most of the folks around here in Salt Lake are running Comcast. Xfinity/Comcast has a setting inside your, what?
I said our condolences.
Yeah. Yeah. For those that are, there's a security setting. It's just really simple. It's like off, low, high, and medium. So we have found in some cases we couldn't use VPNs because that was set on or set to medium. So I would say slide that thing up as much as possible until things start being impacted and then bring it back down a level. So yeah, why not turn up your security? Might as well.
And by the way, James, thank you. That was a very thorough breakdown of both the capabilities and the need and of the firewalls. You mentioned
Yeah.
something in there that reminded me about another, acronyms and terms that we use. We have glossaries and dictionaries of all the IT stuff, but a pen test or a penetration test in the IT world is maybe talk us through that a little bit because you talked about seeing which ports are open or attackers will probe your firewall and your ports.
Yeah.
What does a penetration test do in relation to that?
There's a couple different levels and they seem to be synonymous. So by definition, a penetration test says not only do I check what roads or ports you have open, I'm going to actively poke at those things and see if I can get in. See what maybe on the other end of those things. Is it just a camera, or is it a server that you've left open? Those kind of things. So penetration test not only finds the roads that are open, or we're substituting roads for ports here, but also attempts to gain access to those to see how far down we can get into that thing. So there's kind of an external port scan, which is typical what most people think of when we say pen test. But a full-on penetration test is I'm trying to get into your network so I can come back to you and report and say, look, you have some flaws. Here's where they are. We need to get these holes plugged. And there's
Which is
external and internal as well. If you really get technical, the internal penetration test says, all right, if I'm already in your environment, what can I do? What can I get to? How far can I reach? What is what devices are still set to default login and password, for instance. A lot of times penetration tests will discover that, oh, you plugged a new switch in, but you forgot to change the default password. Printers are notorious for this. Printers by default, no one changes the passwords on those, that kind of a thing. So, we start discovering what can we pull out of that information. So penetration tests can be something pretty simple to, an inexpensive external port scan all the way to a full-blown internal penetration test, which can get pretty pricey, but allows you to show you what's where your exposure is really, where your risks are.
awesome. All right, covered a lot. I feel like
Did.
good
That's
stuff.
a lot of tech in a big hurry.
Yeah,
Hope
it
everyone's still
is.
with us.
Yes. Um, I do want to tease out a little bit one last little topic as we sort of wrap this episode up and the last, again, live episode of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. James, you are pulling double and sometimes triple duty in terms of presenting on IT and conveying new information, knowledge to an audience, and you're doing that this week.
I
So,
am.
teaser for those. We have two conferences going on, both the Utah Bankers Association and the Cassell Conference going on, and you're presenting at the Compliance Conference, the Utah Bankers Association Compliance Conference this week. So, plug for that if you are attending. But James, give us a little teaser of what you're presenting on, and it's cyber themed. So tell us a little bit about the topics you'll be covering there.
Yeah, sure. So the Utah bankers are specifically looking for what are IT auditors looking for in their environment. They come in and scan you, check you out, do a penetration test. What are they looking for? What are they expecting from you? And what are those rules that banks need to follow to be compliant? To be properly compliant and secure. So that's really what we're after. The Cassell conference will be the latest cybersecurity trends, a lot about what we're talking about, some of the newest attack vectors we're seeing coming in, and really how to properly back up your system. Which is cloud versus local, which one's better, pros and cons for each. Those kind of things that we're touching on for those conferences.
Excellent. I guess a little follow up on that in terms of compliance, and again, I would maybe consider compliance and cyber insurance in the category of a little bit more advanced type cybersecurity thinking and techniques. Obviously, banks are under a lot more compliance standards than your average business, as they should be. But as we've mentioned many times here on the podcast, every business has some form of compliance that they need to adhere to. In addition to everything that we've covered here in terms of the firewall, which I'm sure is again kind of 101 for compliance, are there other call outs you would make in ensuring that you are compliant in your cybersecurity posture.
I would be remiss if we didn't say multi-factor authentication, right? So
There it is.
login, password, and some other method. So text message, authenticator, or something. Please add that to all of your stuff. We've hammered on that a lot. Um, some kind of antivirus, right? It's this day and age. It's really important that we have them. And I can't tout enough anti-ransomware products for the critical places where you're keeping your files, your photos, your file servers, your financial data, the executives, anybody that works with money. Those folks should be running anti-ransomware product of some kind to ensure that, again, we're creating layers, right? If it gets past the firewall, if it gets past the antivirus, hopefully, if it's an anti-ransom one there, can at least stop it when it's in process. This is all about creating layers, and then backups are super important. Nobody wants to have the conversation where their stuff got held ransom by ransomware and they don't have proper backups, or their backups were uh, wiped out by the attackers, which we have seen happen. Attackers come in, first thing they do is start looking for your backups and trying to figure out some way to wipe those out. So consider another new term for you. I mean, it's not new to tech, but immutable. So an immutable backup. So this is one where I back it up and I say, do not allow changes to this. Even if I request it, do not allow changes to this. Because what often happens if you're doing a single backup, right? So I back up my stuff, I get infected by ransomware, the backup goes off that night, and now all my files just got overwritten by the ransom, the infected files. They're no longer usable. So periodically making an immutable backup is a way to prevent that from being an issue. And that way, even if they gain access to your credentials for the backups, even they can't delete that backup. So consider immutable backups.
Great stuff.
Awesome.
Derik, any other more advanced questions or themes you want to throw James's way before we wrap this up?
No, I think we got them pretty well covered. Appreciate
Excellent.
it.
Cool.
Well, James, we, as always, appreciate you coming on. It's been a fun month of going live. And again, to our audience and listeners, if you haven't watched or caught the past episodes, of course, they're available on YouTube and, of course, any other podcast channel that you listen to your podcasts on. So be sure to catch those. We will call this week and this Cybersecurity Awareness Month, at least of going live, a wrap. So thank you. As always, stay suspicious, stay aware. We create all of this so that you can be better educated and consequently better protected against the cyber threats that are out there. James, thank you. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Healthy paranoia. It's a good thing.
Yes, indeed. Happy Halloween, everyone, and have a good
Take
rest
care,
of
everyone.
your day and week.
Yeah. Be safe out there, folks.
Yeah.